Well, now that I'm off death row, I'm very blessed, but I'm doing a life without parole sentence. And from my homework, reading the law books and everything, my sentence is an illegal sentence. When they first took me off death row, I should have been given a life sentence with parole eligibility, and I wasn't. So now I fight to receive a parole date, and that's what I've been doing.
In the past 30 years, 138 women have been sentenced to death in the United States. 11 have been executed, 9 by lethal injection, 2 in the electric chair. Sometimes it's the waiting to die that is so intensely painful. Please stick with us as we bring you all the details about Elizabeth Green's on death row and how she was been pardoned by the governor. And please don't forget to subscribe just to support the community. On January 4th, 1988, Elizabeth visited her friend Belinda Coulter, and they decided to get high on cocaine. Neither had enough money to make the purchase. Belinda knew her neighbor Mr. Willis would be willing to pay cash for Elizabeth's food stamps. The two went to visit Willis and quickly completed the $40 transaction. The next morning, a neighbor noticed that Willis' door was wide open. She checked and saw him lying in a pool of his own blood, and she immediately called 911. But it was too late. Police arrived at the gruesome crime scene. It appeared to be a botched robbery attempt, but with no witnesses or suspects, investigators started processing the crime scene for clues. The first thing they noticed was a child's bloody tube sock. They found a bloody shoe print that indicated that it was probably a woman. The police said, "We had 2 different blood types, which led us to believe that the suspect had probably cut themselves during this altercation." Several weeks would pass before a reluctant informant stepped forward. Detectives learned that Belinda Coulter was seen visiting Tommy Willis the same day he was murdered. Belinda Coulter admitted she had sold Mr. Willis some food stamps. They took that money and bought drugs with it. After that interview, they were led to Elizabeth Green right away. One of the things that we noticed with Elizabeth was that she had a cut on her third finger on her right hand. Detective Powell continued his interrogation until Elizabeth Green finally admitted to her involvement in the crime. She gave us a full confession, and during our confession, she implicated Belinda Coulter. They gave a little conflicting stories as to who was the more aggressor in the crime. Eventually, they both confessed to the crime. They wanted more drugs. They knew that Mr. Willis had a substantial sum of cash on him on the Energy apartment. They robbed him, and in the process of the robbery, violently murdered him by stabbing it multiple times. About to face a neck, we later interviewed them, the both of Linda Coulter and Elizabeth Green, and they admitted that they put children's socks on their hands so that they wouldn't leave fingerprints on Green. Elizabeth Green and Belinda Coulter were tried separately for their participation in the robbery murder scheme, but Belinda would be offered a plea bargain in exchange for a reduced sentence to testify against Elizabeth. Elizabeth's trial lasted only 3 days. The prosecution was able to prove that even though Belinda was present, it was Elizabeth who violently bludgeoned Tommy Willis to death. Elizabeth Green was found guilty, and on July 7th, 1988, she was sentenced to death by electrocution. As a condition of her plea bargain, Belinda Coulter pled guilty to a reduced charge of involuntary manslaughter. She managed to avoid a death sentence and received a maximum 50-year prison term. Elizabeth Green would spend a total of 5 years on death row before being permanently transferred to the general prison population. Elizabeth Green would agree. Ironically, she feels the sparing of her life was a double-edged sword. The question is, how much time is enough time? 30, 40, 50 years. Kathleen O'Shea said, has never spent a day in a death row cell, but as a social worker and one of the foremost experts on female offenders, she is intimate with their experience. When I was a graduate student, I participated in a study of women in prison, and had the opportunity to meet and talk to a woman on death row. She was very easy to talk to. She didn't strike me as any brutal in any way. That first fateful meeting was with Lois Nadine Smith, convicted of killing her son's ex-girlfriend, Kathleen said. I want to change my whole way of thinking because somewhere I must have thought that people who are on death row are brutal people and it should be shut out from society. Since then, O'Shea has dedicated nearly 15 years to researching and corresponding with death row inmates. She now fights for improved prison conditions and humane treatment, even for the worst offenders.
Our prisons are full of prisoners who should be given an opportunity for rehabilitation and restorative justice, it's called, by sitting in a cell for the rest of your life. How does that repay the community in any way for what they did? Women on death row are dehumanized in so many ways. It's a very, very closed society, and it's hard to know what's happening there. It's about human rights and the right to be treated as a human being, regardless of who you are or what you did. Most people think that women on death row deserve to be there. And many people on death row are there by pure accident. So I think the biggest misconception is that they're any different than the rest of us.
The first book she wrote was Women and the Death Penalty in the United States. Most of us don't ever expect to meet anybody on death row in our lifetimes. So I wanted to share that experience so that other people could know about it and be aware of it. Currently, there are 55 women sitting on death row in the U.S. According to O'Shea, many are subjected to unthinkable physical and mental abuse. Women on death row are dehumanized in so many ways. It's a very, very closed society, and it's hard to know what's happening there. It's about human rights and the right to be treated as a human being, regardless of who you are, what you did. Perhaps her compassion is not by accident. O'Shea served as a Catholic nun for almost 30 years. In her second book, Revelations from Both Sides of the Bars, O'Shea hoped to show how and why their misfortune could also be ours. Most people think that women on death row deserve to be there, and many people on death row are there by pure accident. So I think the biggest misconception is that they're any different than the rest of us, like so many of the women on death row that confide in O'Shea Andrea. The governor then says there are 4 women on death row, and I'm just going to give them a pardon. I'm going to commute their sentence because they're women. Larry Powell from the Cincinnati Police Department said, I didn't think that was the correct way for him to use his power because I don't think he looked at Elizabeth Green's case individually. I didn't necessarily agree with it, but he's the governor. Her case went through all of the legal appeals, and the case was upheld. Lieutenant Larry Powell of the Cincinnati Police Department was one of the first investigators to arrive at the inner-city crime scene. This is probably one of the most brutal homicide scenes that I had seen up until that point.
Race was a factor, and when you have 4 women on death row, and all 4 women are black, 3 of them from the same county, you have both a racial and a geographic disparity that is hard to explain.
When the governor then says there are 4 women on death row and I'm just going to give them a pardon, I'm going to commute their sentence because they're women, I didn't think that was the correct way for him to use his power, because I don't think he looked at Elizabeth Green's case individually.
I didn't necessarily agree with it, but he's the governor. Her case went through all of the legal appeals, and the case was upheld.
Lying dead in a pool of his own blood, 71-year-old Tommy Willis, a longtime resident and respected elder in the community, had been stabbed over 100 times. No other convict understands the complex legal process better than Elizabeth Green after 4 years on death row. And with all of her legal appeals exhausted, Elizabeth's final execution date was set. It was only through a rare and controversial stroke of luck that her life was spared. On January 11, 1991, just 4 days before he was leaving office after his 8th year of service, Governor Richard Celeste used his entire power and the Constitution as governor to grant clemency for 8 people on death row. Reporter Alan Johnson covered this story for the Columbus Dispatch back in 1991.
1991, just 4 days before he was leaving office after his 8th year in office, Governor Richard F. Celeste used his entire power in the Constitution as governor to grant clemency for 8 people on death row. I would say the public in Ohio was pretty much outraged at that point because they saw the possibility anyway that murderers would be out walking the streets.
That I'm off death row, I'm very blessed, but I'm doing a life without parole sentence. And from my homework, reading the law books and everything, my sentence is an illegal sentence. When they first took me off death row, I should have been given a life sentence with parole eligibility, and I wasn't. So now I fight to receive a parole date. And that's what I've been doing.
I don't see any chance of any court looking at her case again. She got life without parole at a time that there really wasn't life without parole in Ohio, but in essence there was a special governor's order to take her off of death row, and sort of the other side of it was, but you'll never get out of prison.
People have no idea what it's like to walk in my shoes. I have family, but they don't care nothing about me. I haven't had a visit in like 3, 4, 5 years. I am by myself. I am by myself.
Should she have the opportunity to get out? Yeah, I think she should have the opportunity to show that she has progressed educationally, progressed socially, and that she's fit to live in society.
I have changed. I'm older, I'm more wiser. They would have to take a chance on me. I won't be the first inmate society has taken a chance on. No one knows if I'm gonna go out there and do the same thing, but they have to give me a chance to prove myself. That's the only way they'll know.
She killed another human being violently, and the sentence should be very long.
I think she should be thankful that, in fact, she didn't get the death penalty that she was sentenced to. She has life, whereas Mr. Tommy Willis no longer has life because of her actions.
I don't think we should assume that the death penalty is the ultimate punishment that can act as a deterrent. I think life without parole is a very effective sentence.
What do you think about Governor Richard Celeste intercepting the execution on Elizabeth Green? Do you think justice was served? Tell us what you feel in the comments section, and please don't forget to subscribe to have a chance of watching the next execution and also to support the community.